Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Thomas. I am one of the executive members of MASWO. On behalf of the MASWO leadership team, I would like to welcome each one of you to this important conversation. As an introduction, I would like to say a few words about MASWO and the purpose of this conversation. MASWO is a community-based professional association of social workers of Malayali descent in Ontario. MASWO has almost 350 registered social workers at this time. MASWO members work in various branches of social work practice, such as child welfare, community mental health, and medical social work, with several organizations across the province. MASWO enables all Malayali social workers to connect with each other, support each other, and help the communities around them. MASWO has several programs for our members and for the general community. MASWO is completely a voluntary initiative. As you are aware, MASWO has been helping our communities to address various social issues through our diverse voluntary initiatives over the past several years. One of the gruesome but largely unspoken issues prevailing in our communities is domestic violence or intimate partner violence. We often tend to identify domestic violence as physical violence alone, ignoring the psychological, sexual, and economic aspects of an abusive relationship. Domestic violence, especially the multiple forms of violence against women prevailing in our communities, are deeply rooted in the patriarchal norms that have historically shaped and still influencing our individual and collective behaviors and social functioning. The patriarchal social order typically glorifies men as superiors in every realm of life, enabling them to have more power and control over resources and opportunities, and treat women and children as their subjects or properties for their own gains. Therefore, culture shaped and influenced by patriarchy plays a huge role in all forms of abuse and violence against women. Culture is used to justify gender violence and inequalities by evoking traditional beliefs and practices about how women and girls should be treated. It must be noted that domestic violence or intimate partner violence is largely considered as a private matter in our communities. For many women, violence is an inseparable part of their normal marital relationship. Fear, shame, lack of knowledge on resources, etc., compel the victims to conceal abuse and stay in turbulent marital relationships. For many women in our culture, seeking help is not a priority at all, and leaving an abusive relationship is typically subdued by concerns for children, financial reasons, and the ire and blame from extended families or the communities in general. Domestic violence or intimate partner violence adversely affect family functioning, relationships, childcare, and resources in significant ways. Its impacts on children are dreadful, manifold, and often long-lasting. Several studies have shown that aggressive behaviors, withdrawal symptoms, low self-esteem, lack of interest in studies, substance abuse, etc., seen in children often have a direct bearing on them experiencing violence at home and growing up in unhealthy or unsafe family environment. As practicing social workers, we have seen how incidents of domestic violence rapidly change family dynamics and the enormous struggles that families encounter subsequently. A reported incident inevitably invokes the involvement of the law enforcement bodies, child welfare system, criminal justice system, etc. Dealing with the multiple branches of the system is a shattering experience for many immigrant families. It is important for us to initiate conversations in our communities on the effects of domestic violence on our families, equip the victims to report their concerns, and share resources for ending this issue. It is important to note that partner violence leaves long-lasting psychological or emotional wounds on the victims, and the healing requires extensive clinical work. In fact, healing is a long journey, and the victims, including the abuser, need wide-ranging support at many levels. Today's conversation will focus on the signs of an abusive relationship, violence against women in particular, an overview of how power and control contributes to domestic violence, its multiple effects on children, essential elements of a safety plan, and how to navigate resource when seeking help. The fundamental purpose of this webinar is to break the taboo on domestic violence or intimate partner violence, encourage our communities to be more open towards having conversations on this issue, and seek timely help to avoid lasting damages. This conversation is not against all men, but certainly against all men who abuse their partners and justify their actions under the shadow of patriarchy. Therefore, this conversation will address the role of men in mitigating DV as well. Treating a partner in a violent or abusive manner is extremely inhuman, heinous, and unacceptable. Our relationships should be an enriching experience for us. Our children should be able to witness the overflowing joy of meaningful relationships and engagements of their parents. Our relationships should be free of all forms of violence and abuse. It is our fundamental right as human beings. We have a great panel of speakers with us today to throw light into the various dimensions of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. They have put a lot of effort into organizing this conversation. On behalf of MASWO family, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Liz Brown, the Executive Director of Violence Against Women Services, Ceci Daniel, Jisha Johnson, and Lasso Casey. All of them have years and years of experience in working with the victims and families in domestic violence situations. Thanks, Liz, Ceci, Jisha, and Lasso for being with us this morning and helping us to address this serious concern. As we move forward, the moderator will introduce each one of them and speak more about their works. Shine Verghese is going to be our moderator today. Shine Verghese is a registered social worker. She is currently working as a child protection worker with the Family and Children Services in Nairobi region. She obtained her master's degree in social work from Bharatmala College in India in 2007. She worked as a social worker in various capacities in India. Shine immigrated to Canada with her family in 2013. She obtained her certificate in social work practice from Ryerson University in 2015. Shine is a great social worker, and she is highly passionate about helping the victims in DV situations. MASWO will continue to work towards making our families and communities safer, especially for women and children, through our social work interventions. I humbly request our members and the community partners to reach out to MASWO for support at any time. Thank you so much. Over to Shine.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank MASWO Committee, Executive Committee, for giving me this opportunity to moderate the session. I would like to comment the tremendous efforts of MASWO Committee in order to cater to promote the professional and social development of all social workers in Canada, especially among the Malayali descent. Just for the information of the audience, I think most of you should be aware the session will be recorded. As we all know, the land on which we are is not ours. Let us begin by acknowledging the original owners of this land. In the spirit and intent of Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendation, we acknowledge the traditional indigenous territories on which we gather at the beginning of all MASWO meetings. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Shawnee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Squamish, Hiawatha, and the Alderville First Nation. By learning, understanding, and acknowledging, we wish to pay respect to the Turtle Islands, Mother Earth, and to the rich Indigenous history of Ontario. Charles had already given us a wonderful introduction about what the session would look like and why we have the session today. So just to quote from Patrick Barnett, who has written a poem, and just taking one of his lines, if you start now, who knows what you could do? Just let your light shine through. And this is the line taken from the Survivors Anthem, Shine Through, written by Patrick Barnett. So as we did here, domestic violence is also called as domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, and which is defined as a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain power and control over an intimate partner. So domestic violence is not a relationship problem or a rough patch in a relationship. It is the ongoing. It is a pattern of behavior that tends to begin with something seemingly minor, which then escalates over time and becomes increasingly dangerous in nature. The more we talk about domestic violence, the more likely it becomes that we build awareness, identify abused behaviors, and take actions to prevent harm to people in our communities who may be family, our friends, our neighbors, or coworkers. As all of us know, in South Asian communities, the numbers are underreported simply because these issues of violence and abuse are not reported enough. So today, we are very fortunate to have our distinguished guests for the day who are experts in the field, and they are going to bring their insight and experience today. So each presentation is a 15 minutes, and each presenter will present on their topic for 15 minutes. And towards the end of the presentation, we will have a 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A session. Audience, please remember to use the chat feature of the Zoom for your questions or sharing your thoughts. And all your questions will be addressed by our presenters in the Q&A session. Even if we may not be able to answer all your questions due to time restrictions, one of our MASWO executive member will be getting back to you. I just want to remind everyone that the scope of domestic violence is humongous, as in the case in many other areas of social work. So what the presenters are sharing are pieces of information enriched by their experience and expertise, and we have compiled them into 15 minutes presentation. And you guys know how hard it would be. It's not an easy task. Just to give you guys an overview about how the session would look like, I would like, can you please present the slide which says the overview about today's topic? So today we will be discussing about some of the topics that would be discussed would be domestic violence facts, risk factors that perpetuates abuse in South Asian culture, reason it is so prevalent in South Asian culture, types and impact of domestic violence, screening tools and safety plan tips, systems involvement in child protection perspective, engaging men who use violence from why to how to support men, and resources and community support. Let me take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Liz Brown, who is the Executive Director of Violence Against Women Services, Elgin County. Liz works in partnership with our generous community and service network partners to ensure safety, dignity, and healing of thousands of women and children who have experienced abuse. Liz is an inspiring speaker who can share the painful reality of violence against women, its profound impact on so many mighty souls, and cultivate hope to create the equity and liberation needed for the end of oppression in all its forms. She holds honors in Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science with a focus on Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, and a Master's of Social Work with a specialty. Today, Liz will be talking about the prevalence of domestic violence in Canadian context and share from her experience what are some of the contributing factors to domestic violence and safety planning from her knowledge and expertise in the field. On behalf of MASWO, I welcome Liz to share her thoughts.
Thank you so much. That's a lovely introduction. I appreciate being here today. I'm going to show you I'm not a tech wizard. Amongst my other skills, this is not one of them. So hang on while I try and share my screen with you. And hopefully we are able to get that right at the beginning of where I wish to be. One sec. Okay. Let's see. Fingers are crossed. I hope everyone can see the screen at this time. And I'm hoping you can see something that is orange with a bunch of words in the center of it. Yes,
we can. Yes.
Is it taking up your full screen? No.
No, we can see you as well.
All right, then I will take myself out of there. There we go. It's lovely to actually be able to see you too. It's difficult in these times not to be sitting across from one another. So if you're comfortable turning on the camera, feel free to. I will be trying to see your faces as I'm speaking as well. Arundhati Roy is an amazing activist, writer, novelist, and speaker to the heart of so many moments. And she wrote a beautiful piece in the Financial Times a year ago, April, when the pandemic of COVID-19 was first ravaging so many communities across the globe. And she talked about saying really clearly that historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with, I'm sorry, I'm having one more technical issue, but I'm going to get rid of it. It's me. Uh-oh. And now I went forward instead of backwards. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. I hope you were able to see it before. Her main message is that in the moment of pandemic, we have the opportunity to break from our past histories, from both the inequities that we hold, the racism that we hold, the biases that we hold, the damage to Mother Earth we've been doing for centuries. And we have the opportunity to step back and decide who we're going to be as we go through this portal, what we want to fight for, and who we choose to be on the other side of it. And this portal of the pandemic of COVID-19 is on top of so many other pandemics. It is not alone or isolated. It is connected so much to each and every other piece. We also have the pandemic of violence against women and children, the pandemic of gender-based violence that around the world has increased and been exacerbated by the pandemic of COVID-19. This is where we'll land our focus today. I think Tedros' words are so important and so powerful in seeing how these two pandemics come together. One has a vaccine, the other does not. And the vaccine and the antidote to the violence that we will be talking about today really is our deep-rooted efforts that he describes so passionately to work together to actually uproot the sources of inequality and inequity, and to determine what liberation would truly look like for women, for men, and for folks who don't identify in the gender binary. So we know that abuse happens to women, to girls, to boys, and to men. We know that the severity and frequency of abuse is different for women, and it is different for girls, and it is different for boys. We also know it's pretty hard to talk about. That's why I'm quite considerably impacted by the plus 40 people who've decided to lean into this conversation today. Because it's about what happens in our relationships. It's not about a stranger harming us. It's about someone we know and someone we often love. That makes it a difficult conversation to discuss. We also know it takes many forms. It has physical forms of violence, such as punching, choking, hitting, biting, kicking. Sexual forms of coercion, such as any unwanted touch of a sexual nature that you did not or you could not consent to, and yet feel profoundly responsible for and a deep sense of shame about. We know that 1 in 3 women across our globe experience harm in the context of their relationships. That harm takes many forms, including those I've identified, as well as emotional harm, that is the belittling, the reducing of someone else's sense of well-being and safety in the world, to reduce their sense of efficacy, their ability to make decisions in our own best interests. Spiritual harm that takes away the very concrete faith foundation that can hold so many of us up in the face of all. These forms of coercion and harm are intended for one and singular item, which is to remove the power and control from another human being and to take that power and control ourselves. 1 in 3 women across the world experience this moment. And when we think about that tangibly, that's at least 12 of us on this call today. 1 in 7 little boys under the age of 18 are sexually abused by a male who they know in the course of their lifetime. 1 in 7. And those are the men who are able to report and share that pain with another. 1 in 3 women are sexually abused as children by a man who they know. Does this mean all men are abusive? Absolutely not. Does it mean we have some very large systemic issues that are affecting how we show up in the world as women and as men, and the very inequity we have in our oppressive structures that really influence how we are in our families, in our relationships, and in how we express and show love to one another? Abuse can be a single act, and it can also be a pattern of repeated coercion. And I've asked that I could share a few stories to begin today about how that abuse is felt and determined. I've chosen to share them in the first person, and they are shared from a number of women and men who have agreed to have their stories told. I think it brings it to a closer place to where our heads and our hearts are able to connect with the reality of what we are speaking of. I am 7. I am a boy, and my grandfather makes me so sad. He touches me down there and says that I like it. I don't, and I am scared. I am a 10-year-old boy, and my mom's boyfriend hits her a lot. That makes me really mad, and I want to hit him back. I want to help my mom. I am 13. I am a girl, and a group of boys at my school, kind of my friends, they're in my class, they pinned me down, they grabbed my breasts, and they poked down there. And they laughed at me, and then got up and left me there. They went outside for recess. I am 32. When I was 5, my father began coming into my room and fondling me. My daughter is now 5, and I am remembering smells, pain, and shame. I am so afraid. I have panic attacks, and I struggle to go to work. I am 51, and I'm married. My husband tells me every day that I am a good-for-nothing piece of crap. He says I'm retarded and that no one else would ever want me. He leaves bruises on my heart that hurt so much. You can't see them, but I feel them every day. I am 60. I waited until my children finished university to leave. I had no money and wanted to make sure they had a bright future. I thought no one would ever believe me about the abuse that I went through. I am 70, and I am a grandpa to 2 boys. They call me Papa. They're 7 and 9, and when I was their age, I went to church. My priest hurt me and touched me a lot. I hated church. I got angry and I hit my brothers. I didn't want this to happen to my grandchildren. I'm remembering it now, and my fists are clenched. I am 82. I live with my daughter and son-in-law. When my husband died, I moved in with them. I'm in a wheelchair and I get around the house okay. My son-in-law hits me. I'm so afraid to tell anyone. I think they won't believe me and think I have dementia, but my mind is sharp. I want to leave, and I am on a waiting list for a nursing home. The stories I've just shared with you are stories of multiple women and men who have reached out to our services to talk about what has happened to them and the effects that that has had on their mind, body, and soul. The harm of someone who they believed they would find love and respect with and found violation and hurt. Those effects obviously left physical effects such as broken bones, bruises, concussions, skull fractures, perforated eardrums. Sexual effects such as miscarriages, sexually transmitted diseases, genital pain, bruising or tearing of the vagina or anus. Psychological pain, hypervigilance, acute anxiety, chronic stress, flashbacks, memory loss, and insomnia. Psychiatric effects such as post-traumatic stress, depression, dissociation. Lethal effects. 1 woman or 1 girl is killed in Canada every 2.5 days. Every 2.5 days. Since the last time the committee and I met, another girl, another woman has died at the hands of someone who said they loved her. The other effects this has is a person has a reduced sense of safety. They have a reduced sense of self-efficacy, ability to act in one's own best interest, and a focus on the person who causes the harm rather than ourselves, which makes total sense. It can appear like that's an ambivalence or a misunderstanding of how large the harm is, but it's actually a rather brilliant coping strategy to keep oneself and our feet on the spinning earth. So that's a lot in 8 minutes. It's a lot to hold and it's a lot to put in a room. And I'm imagining it's touching us all in different places. As a child, I experienced harm myself. I know there are other people on the call who have experienced harm in the past and harm in the present. It is a difficult piece to talk about, and I think it's so important to discuss the roots. The harm that happened to myself, the harm that happened to the 8 people's stories I shared with you was not our fault. It is not rooted in an individual proclivity, failure, or problem. The fix is not within me or within each of the people I described to you. The solution to ending violence against women and children and gender-based violence worldwide is in ripping out the roots of inequity and oppression. It is looking at the very systems that have stood for decades and centuries that support violation and oppression and squeeze out from the earth every piece of water and love and care and kindness we need to each flourish on our particular spaces on the earth and how we relate to one another. We have violence against women at epidemic and pandemic proportions because of misogyny, because of racism, because of profound hatred that needs to be dismantled in all our systems and beliefs. And that shows up in our individual relationships, and it cripples women, and it cripples men, and it cripples our human potential for love and fullness and peace. I was in Toronto recently underneath the Gardiner Expressway. I promise it was in a safe way. And I have never gone to Fort York Museum before, which is a point of clear settlement of where many people from my homeland came to take away the homeland of Indigenous peoples in Canada with harm, with violence, and with torture. There's a canoe here that was built to recognize there are 2 canoes going side by side. One is an Indigenous canoe and one is a non-Indigenous canoe. And inside this canoe are pictures of residential school children, some who survived, some who did not, and some whose spirits and bodies are being found now. In the broader picture of this canoe, you can see all the little tiles. When you get closer, you can see what each of the tiles shows. It shows pictures of family. It shows pictures of students in those schools set up to take people from their culture and to hurt and to harm them in the form of taking ultimate coercive control over an entire set of nations. And as you get closer and closer to each of these pictures, you find right there in all of the hundreds of tiles that school children have placed in the canoe, that this is about the need for equity, not equality. If we had equity, we wouldn't have violence against women. If we had equity, we would not have all forms of racial violence. If we had equity, we would have the seeds of peace. There are numerous antidotes to the oppression we face and to the oppression that is cultivated across all of our systems and is landing in our individual lives. The key piece that is the major antidote is to disrupt isolation. The largest effect of violence is isolation. The largest effect of racism is the same effects we talked about, and the isolation of believing somehow and being told to believe that somehow that is something wrong with the person to whom the harm and oppression is inflicted. To disrupt that isolation literally creates the opportunity for hope and healing on a systemic level and an individual level. Because the trauma isolates, and by trauma I mean the trauma of oppression, the trauma of racism, the trauma of misogyny, the trauma of the climate emergency, and the trauma in individual experiences of harm. And connection is truly what heals. Now, how we do that connection is a little bit tricky because it means we have to really hear, and we have to really hear some really hard things. We have to hear the absolute worst things we do to one another as human beings. And to truly hear those, we have to hear them here, in that deep place of the heart center. And to do that, we have to connect with this, with that. And as social workers, we know how painful that is and how essential it is to not locate the problem within the person and believe that they need greater self-esteem or they need better life decisions. Rather, they need a world that loves and respects them for who they are and doesn't believe coercion and harm is okay in any form. So we need to hear that's an antidote to the violence. We need to believe the unbelievable. Every time someone tells, people say, oh my goodness, but that person is so nice. They are so kind. That's because the person who causes harm isn't driving around in a white Ocano van, opening the door, offering candy to strangers. It is the people we know. It is a person who causes harm, not an abuser, not a perpetrator, a person who causes harm. And that means we can have an incredible ability to see the complexity of that person who could be very caring, very warm, very charismatic, and very abusive, and still be all of those things. So to believe is really difficult and necessary, and then to connect to safety, to being able to call in rather than call out the behavior of others, to be able to move people towards less coercion and more equitable relationship. And then to make sure together we care for ourselves. And I don't mean this in terms of self-care, and I'm conscious my time is wrapping up, so I'm going to touch on this briefly. I mean this in terms of community care. As social workers talking about this moment, we tend to talk a lot about self-care, at least in my little corner of the world here in St. Thomas, Ontario, we do. And community care is so radically different because it's not about something that we need as individuals to do. It's not about something we need to fix or change and increase in our own lives. It's about how we come together to share the pain of this moment and to share also our ability to cultivate hope in the face of the same. Rupi Kaur has some beautiful poetry, and one of hers that I turn to often is In the Sun and All Her Flowers. And she writes, the road to changing the world is never ending. Pace yourself. And for Sherry Jisha John on this call and others who know me, pacing myself is a hard one. And for most social workers I know, pacing self is not so great either. But the pacing is so essential to the light that we spoke about earlier, to the light that each of us bring to this moment of oppression and harm. At the same time, I was underneath the Gardner Expressway 2 weeks ago. I was in a storage container underneath it that's existed there for decades. And a light art installation had been set up to take the pulses of every person who came into the installation. And when it began at the beginning of October, they took the pulses of doctors and nurses working in the pandemic of violence and also in the pandemic of COVID-19. And then it keeps adding those pulses. So I added my pulse to it on October the 30th. And I really think today what I'm offering to you is my light to meet with your light, to continue to make all of those pieces of the light we have on this call come together in a much broader pulse of light that is so focused on what we are able to do together, on how we are able to rise together, and how we are able to make sure that the very sidewalk in every community, this one being in downtown Toronto, has love at its very, very root and is constantly digging out the weeds of hatred and racism and sexism and misogyny that keep the coercion and oppression and harm of so many. And finding ways to, in the words of my colleague Sandy Montour from Six Nations, who talks about us each as being light workers, the Creator has given us a bundle of exactly what we need to be able to spread our light and join with the light of others. And this is what I hope today we do as we're talking about painful pieces, recognizing the incredible light that we each hold together in our souls, minds, and bodies. It's my privilege to be here with you today. Thank you.
Road to changing is never ending. Thank you, Liz, for highlighting the impact of domestic violence during this pandemic period, pandemic amongst another pandemic. And the stories that you shared, highlighting the root causes of domestic violence, reminds that domestic violence cannot be addressed in isolation, and we need a multifaceted approach. And let us hear, believe connect, to be safe, and to call in. Our next presenter is Sissy A. Daniel. Sissy is a registered social worker, psychotherapist practicing in the Greater Toronto area. She is a mental health professional and a relational therapist with more than 15 years of service in diverse settings, including community-based family service organization, school board, and private practice agencies. Sissy supports clients dealing with the impact of relational trauma and issues that accompany with aggression, depression, anxiety, grief, and loss. Sissy will walk us through some of the alarming facts of domestic violence, some of the risk factors, and the reasons that domestic violence is prevalent in South Asian culture, following with some screening tools and safety tips. Over to you, Sissy.
Thank you, Shine. Thank you for that introduction. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you, MASWO, for this opportunity to present. I'm truly feeling blessed in being here this morning. Thanks to all the attendees for being here on a Saturday morning. It tells us that you care about this subject matter and you've pushed away some other priorities to be here this morning. So truly, we appreciate this. Thank you, Liz, for your very powerful presentation. I've learned so much from what you've shared, so thank you. Good morning, everybody. To all our Malayali colleagues and community members, a warm namaskaram. To any Hindi, Punjabi, or Pakistani friends attending this morning, namaste again, sat sri akal, and adab. So given how far we've reached in this presentation, I'm just going to invite us all to take an intentional pause moment and reflect on how we're doing thus far. Some contents of the presentation today may feel light and some things may trigger us and feel heavy. I'm requesting us all to be attuned to our own body's needs and to give it the care, be it with some deep breathing, stretches, some light movements, a warm cup of coffee or tea besides you, holding onto a comfy cushion pillow as we plow along the remainder of the presentation. Before I start off with the contents of my presentation, please note that the remaining speakers, Jisha, Lazar, and myself, we will be diving deeper into the topic of domestic violence. And we'll be talking in particular in the context of our South Asian community. So before we begin, again, we would like to make some disclaimers. So while MASWO has kindly introduced us in the group chats, as well as here this morning as experts in the DV field, please know that like most of you, we are frontline workers, sharing our know-hows of working closely with families who've experienced domestic violence. And as we present on this difficult topic of violence against women, we by no means are intending to look down on our male gender or our heritage, but we are presenting some of the age-old cultural, religious, societal beliefs and structures that is no longer serving us, but harming our community, including our children, women, and men. So you would see in the presentation that women are referred as victims and men as abusers because statistics show that majority of the time it is the case in our community here and as Liz mentioned, globally as well. But we care for and respect both women and men, and beyond our professional roles, we also hold social occasions of being a wife, husband, sister, brother, daughter, and son. So we recognize this morning and we acknowledge that intimate partner abuse is sometimes experienced by both genders. Lastly, another disclaimer, some contents may be repetitive or we may not be able to cover all of it in our slides given the time limitations. And I'm going to ask my apologies. I think I'm going to go well over 15 minutes. So please bear with me. So let's start off with the very first slide. For myself. Kusum, please, to the next slide. Excellent. So as Shine already mentioned, DV is one issue with different names. And some of the commonly used terms are violence against women, which clearly depicts that women is the victim. Intimate partner violence, one can infer that violence may be mutually directed or one-sided within the intimate relationship. And then family violence or domestic violence that occurs in the context of families and subunits within a family or home, like in-laws and extended family being unsupportive towards a daughter-in-law, which is quite common in our culture. Another fact, sadly, DV exists globally, along with another pandemic, as Liz mentioned earlier. This is another pandemic that affects all societies, communities, races, religion. It's prevalent amidst all social economic class, educational background, and it affects all sexual orientations and ages, from very young children to adolescents, adults, and elderly. Another heart-wrenching fact, again, the numbers on DV. Over 40,000 arrests results just from domestic violence in Canada. Over 6,000 women and children sleep in shelters every night across Canada because it isn't safe for them at home. And then $7.4 billion is spent to deal with this aftermath of spousal violence alone in Canada. And this is again paid by the Canadian government and taxpayers collectively. The next slide is an infographic by World Health Organization. It's a longitudinal research that took place, and it highlights the prevalence of this pandemic on a global scale. As is evident in this slide, Southeast Asia has the highest prevalence rate of domestic violence in the world. And the numbers in orange, again, is a stark reminder of the gruesome reality that 1 in 3 women in the world will experience physical and sexual forms of violence. So what are some of the important risk factors that actually keep perpetuating this violence in the South Asian community? Kusum, do we have the next slide? Okay. Next slide, please.
Can you see the slide?
I'm still seeing the infographic. I'm not too sure if others are seeing another slide, but I'm seeing the infographic at the moment.
Yeah, Kusum,
Same here.
Kusum, can you just move to the couple of the next 2 slides? Move.
There we go.
Can you see this one?
Yes,
Yes, now we can.
thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
Thank you so much. No worries there. So some risk factors that perpetuates violence in our community. Firstly, the societal and religious beliefs and value systems. And it manifests in the form of collectivism, competitiveness, patriarchy, dominance, rigid hierarchy, caste system, and religious differences. Our culture is very collective in their approach to life. We uphold family, community, and societal values above individual needs and desires. So the collective mindset usually prioritizes the us and we, and often neglects the I and the me needs. Usually members of a family unit and community make collective decisions for individuals. For example, parents, grandparents, extended family, religious community members collectively instill from a very young age in a South Asian child the concept of maintaining family honor. And in our homes, we strictly forbid our children from the practice of dating. Whereas in the North American Canadian culture allows for an adolescent to actually make their own decisions. It promotes individuality. So when I do family counseling, I see how this collective ideology that we uphold in our culture, that parents uphold it, and the tensions it creates between parents and children unit in the home, as the children increasingly become defiant and deviate from those values, as they are no more able to relate to it. They rebel against the parents, leave the home at odd hours in the night, hang around the wrong peers and do the wrong things. And this further causes conflict in the parent unit as well. In such situation, as Liz was mentioning, the antidote, usually my main work with the parents is to help them become aware of adopting a flexible mindset where they can continue to uphold their own value systems for their own lives, but also accept and respect their children's sense of independence and autonomy. I also want to share a client scenario I had walked into just prior to the COVID-19 hit us, when I had showed up to an Indian couple's home to do family therapy. And again, this example I'm sharing just to show how this collectivism, this ideology plays up. So the husband and wife welcomed me into the home, and they had recently reconciled after an incident of domestic violence. The court has, of course, allowed for it. And here the husband had been charged. So the couple not only introduced me to their 2 teenage children in the home, but the husband to his own parents, the wife to her own parents, and a sibling who all lived in the same home. So a family unit with different subunits under one roof. What was even more fascinating and intriguing was that they showed me their backyard, and that while the house had a back fence, it did not have side fences for 2 houses down to the left and 2 houses down to the right. And the husband proudly shared that the 2 houses to the right and to the left belonged to their friends, as it was 5 Indian families that had brought homes together on that street next to each other. They usually spent time in the evenings after work having tea together, and their children took turns on the weekends to do the lawns for the 5 houses. So really a collective team of friends coexisting together. But on the flip side to this was that when tensions arose in the couple's home, out of the 4 family friends that lived beside them, only 1 family remained neutral, while all the remaining 3 families sided with the husband and blamed the woman for calling the police and getting them involved. So the wife was not only blamed, shamed, and criticized by her own parents, her in-laws, children, but also 3 other sets of couples and the elderly parents that all lived around her. She felt completely isolated, abandoned, and cut off because majority of the friends collected together and became allies with the husband. So as a gentle encouragement to all of us here this morning, that when we show up, either as a friend or as a helping system to our South Asian families, I'm requesting this, that we also need to take that extra time to get to know the family dynamics. In our professional roles, do a thorough assessment of clients' strengths, their support systems, their risks, but also to involve the extended family and friends in services, with the hope that the victim's environment becomes safer and healthier. Another big risk factor that keeps DV going inside our South Asian culture is the patriarchy. In patriarchal societies, beliefs such as these are upheld, that man is the head of the family. Sons should be the heirs to ancestral inheritance. Women are expected to dress in a particular way or to take on specific roles inside the family unit, like being a homemaker, cook, clean, raise children, serve in-laws, as well as work outside the home. These are all expectations that somehow sends a message of one being superior, the other inferior. One has more power and control, while the other is weak. And it just keeps perpetuating that cycle of inequality. So these beliefs tend to bring about discord and conflict in the home. Another factor, another risk factor is cultural norms and practices like the arranged marriage system, dowry, joint family system, also brings huge strain inside marriages. I often hear from victims that complain that while prior to the marriage, the husband and his side of the family did not make much demands for dowry, but once after marriage, they are constantly criticized, compared with others, and blamed, and she hears blames not just towards her, but her parents for not giving enough dowry. Again, a form of harassment and abuse that causes tensions in our families. And then in our culture, men and women are trained and socialized differently in that from a very young age, a male child is groomed to be the breadwinner, to hide their emotions or sentiments, and while a female is expected to take on traditional roles of being a housewife. And then there are other risk factors that continue to heighten violence inside relationship, some of which are financial struggles. For us, many immigrants here in Canada are not just unemployment, but underemployment, poverty, lack of a high school education, language barriers, again, witnessing family violence as a child, immigration status, disabilities, and then substance abuse. So in this slide, I wanted to bring our attention that in some South Asian homes, violence occurs from pre-birth, infancy phases to elderly stages in life. And it's so heartwarming to see how Liz and this slide matches, because I think Liz mentioned right from the age of 6 to the age of 82. She gave us some vivid examples of how both male and females go through experience violence. So here again, in our South Asian culture, it starts from pre-birth, sadly so. So it manifests when husbands, his parents, extended family force a woman to go through selective abortion, or when they abuse her during her pregnancy because she's carrying a girl child, or perform female infanticide, are all forms of violence that occurs right from pre-birth and infancy phases. And then as a young child, a girl child continues to experience violence in the forms of being forced for child marriage, female genital mutilation, dating violence, rape, forced marriage, abuse, and incest. And into adulthood, a woman again experiences dowry abuse, partner violence, marital rape, forced pregnancy. And I just want to point out that especially in our culture, even to this day and age, it is in Canada that we are given the rights to call it marital rape. But truth be told, in our Indian culture, even to this day, it is not considered that if the wife does not give consent and the husband forces it, it's not considered as rape. So we are glad that we are in a land that defines what marital rape is. And I want our fellow Indians, our fellow South Asians to recognize that at the end of the day, in intimate relationships, we need two partners to be giving consent for intimacy. Other than that, it's still considered a marital rape. And then in elderly phases, lastly, a woman in their gray years continue to experience abuse in the forms of abandonment and neglect. So here are some reasons as to why domestic violence continues to be so high in our South Asian homes. Again, we touched upon it in previous slides, some of the ingrained societal religious beliefs, value systems, cultural norms. Parents, despite recognizing the dysfunctions in the home and relationships, continue to keep their family intact, and as they fear loss and separation. In our community, there's a huge stigma and shame around divorce, and hence victims often remain silent on the issue. Financial dependency, where a woman is often made to feel that she is completely reliant on her husband, as he's given her a good house, car, and things like that, and that she would never be able to afford that kind of living on her own. She's kept isolated and cut off from her social connections. And then comorbid states also may exist, like undiagnosed, untreated mental health or substance abuse. And then other reasons like fear of systems involvement, like the police and the CS, or lack of awareness on available supports and resources, as well as lack of coordinated, culturally sensitive services, keeps this issue of DV at a high rate within our community. Quickly, I'm going to just touch upon what are the different types of abuse. I think right from Charles to Shine to Liz, we all talked about this. But again, a few main categories is physical abuse, and how that typically shows up inside relationship is hitting, slapping, push, shoves, holding her in choke positions, verbal, sexual, stalking behaviors. Another interesting one in our culture, very specific to our culture, is the self-abuse. What I've seen, and I've worked with clients, is where abusers self-abuse to further abuse their wives and get her criminally charged. I've worked with dads who, when their wives call 911, they went on to hit themselves against a wall or scratched themselves to use as evidence that when the police showed up, they pressed charges against their wife. So the abusers used lies to manipulate the system and get the wife charged. Other few forms is destruction to property, injury to pets, and in extreme forms, homicide. Another category is psychological abuse, and how it shows up inside relationship is again emotional and mental forms of abuse, when a husband constantly makes use of threats to either send her back home to her home country, or that he will divorce her, or uses those put downs, critical tones, and blame tones. Silence treatment, a biggie in our culture, is another form of abuse. Increasingly in my therapy space, I am seeing in our South Asian culture, couples who are engaging in extramarital affairs or have maintained a parallel life of having a wife and children, and then also a mistress, which again causes huge stress and conflict in the home. And then other psychological abuse tactics are keeping mom away, keeping mom dependent, putting extended family pressure and the demand for dowry, or using even the children against her. And then financial and social abuse, how it shows up is where the husband or the abuser refuses to give wife access to money or bank, denies her the right to work or to drive or maintain relationships with family and friends, and even forbids her from going to place of worship. Another tactic unique to our culture is making use of rituals to abuse a woman. And I've worked with Indian and Pakistani families where the victim shared that her husband and his extended family constantly took her to the priest to ward off demon spirits, or performed witchcraft or black magic on her to keep her gripped in constant fear. Again, form of abuse. And then when abuser constricts the wife or woman to the house, and she's not allowed to go to a shelter, that's another form of abuse. And on the other end, other extreme end, is I've also seen clients that, again, men who have dropped their wives off on the roads, middle of nowhere, or on highways, or outside a shelter, and left her to fend for herself. Again, that is abuse. And then lastly, another type of abuse inflicted on victims is systems abuse, in which the abuser forces and manipulates the victim to make false income assistance. And recently, over COVID times, we've seen an increase or false claims for serve benefits, where she's forced to commit fraud. Also forced to divorce or remarry to sponsor and get money that way, or denying wife sponsorship unless she gives more dowry. And then there are forms where she's forced to file for false separation to claim social subsidized housing and social assistance. So some of the effects from these various forms of abuse is that, again, it can result in physical injuries and in extreme cases, loss of life, comorbid states where adults and children exposed to DV are prone to developing mental health issues like anxiety, depression, PTSD, as well as substance abuse. Children struggle to maintain focus and perform poorly in their school. Victims find it difficult to cope up and perform at their jobs. And helping systems become involved, then the family goes through healthcare, legal, financial costs, and losses. Another grave impact is that intergenerational abuse gets perpetuated over and over and over again. And then DV leads to multiple systems being involved with the family, from the school, court system, CS, and family counseling agencies. So having shared with you all the types of abuse and its impact, I thought of sharing this resource, which can either be used by a couple or a victim as a self-assessment tool. But please, my gentle reminder and a suggestion tip is only if you are a couple who has low or moderately low conflict in the relationship, then yes, proceed safely to use this assessment tool. And then as professionals, we can use this tool when we are thinking of referring a client to support services like couple or family counseling. It's a short screener that assesses if the couple use physical hurts, insults, threats, screaming, or sexual forms of abuse. And if the score on this screener is above 10, as service providers, we should refrain from suggesting or making referral for couple counseling. Instead, we could offer the couple to do individual therapy as a starting place. Next slide, please. Thank you. Safety plan. So again, I'm going to go very quickly. I know I've ran so much over my time. So some of the very important components to keep in mind when developing a safety plan is please remind the couple or the victim, keep phone at all times. Remember to clear call display or browser history frequently. I've gone into the next slide, Kusum. Thank you. Remove from the body scarf or shawl or jewelry. People to turn to for help or to inform about the danger, both formal and informal supports. Places in the house or outside to avoid when in escalated states like the washroom, garage, kitchen where there's access to knife. Remind to keep a grab and go bag ready in one place so that they can be taken in a hurry, including essential clothes, medications, health cards, proof of cohabitation. Inquire if the client wants to open a separate bank account, locker to keep gold jewelry and other important documents like passports, birth certificates. Remind and demonstrate fetal position and being curled up during escalated states, again, to heighten that safety in this area of the body. Remind client that your phone work phone number is not a crisis line and that it remains unattended off work hours. And then making sure to document all of that in the client's file. I'm going on to the next slide, please, Kusum. Thank you. And this is a quick shot of, how to make a very customized safety plan or self-care plan when working with clients. As professionals, please start off with helping the client recognize what are the crisis mode, the signs of crisis mode. So is there constant yelling and critical tones and put down tones inside the relationship? Is the partner being absent consistently? out and about and doing his own thing, neglecting the family needs? Is he waking her up in the middle of the night to have arguments and to fight and to find solutions to the problem? So these are all signs that crisis mode has set in. Move on to then, help the client develop skill sets. Again, either referring them to the counseling agency so that they can develop these skill sets around de-escalation skills, grounding skills, communication skills, emotional regulation skills. Or there are times that we have to prepare a client, a victim, to actually seek a shelter system to end the abusive relationship. And so teaching her those skills and informing her about those support systems. So people and places that she can draw support from. And again, becoming very specific and helping her to write these things down. So when the crisis mode shows up inside the relationship, it's either in a picture form on her phone so that she knows that, okay, this is what I need to kick in. This is part of my safety protocol. And so just preparing her to, just getting her to be clear on the people and the places that she can draw support from. And then from there, moving on to helping her to list as to what it is that she wants out of the support system when she banks on them. Is she relying, is she calling out a friend so that she can be listened to? Is she calling out to a friend or a family member to be reminded of her strengths? Is she calling a friend to tell that, please take me out of self-pity, I'm riddled with that? And then activities that she will do to support herself and take care of herself, whether it's in her mind, whether it's in her body, whether it's in her spirit. And then helping the client always to remember her strengths. So just, building her sense of agency, her resilience. These are quite important components when making a safety plan with a client. So that is it. At the end of these are my slides. I hope this was informative and helpful. And I will hand it back over to Shine.
Thank you, Sissy. Thanks for sharing the risk of domestic violence in South Asian culture and stressing on the fact that domestic violence or intimate partner violence is a serious public health problem that affects millions of people around the globe, and how creating a safety plan is very important and very vital when someone is considering to leave an abusive partner. As we have heard, let us have our eyes and heart open to listen and help a survivor strategize what they can do to stay safe and keep their children and their pets and themselves safe in the midst of abuse. Moving on to the next presenter. As we know, many children exposed to violence in the home are also victims of physical abuse. Children who witness domestic violence or are victims of abuse themselves are at serious risk of long-term physical and mental health problems. Our next presenter, Jisha Johnson, will now talk about the impact of domestic violence on children. Jisha is a registered social worker and currently working at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto. She completed her master's in social work from Nehru Arts and Science College, Coimbatore, India, and has 7 years of experience working in the field of crisis management, family support, and child protection service. And Jisha, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Shine. Good morning, and once again, welcome everyone. Without any delay, we will move to the topic, the impacts on children from the exposure to domestic violence. How children are impacted from witnessing the violence. How do they witness the violence? Witnessing violence, seeing. Children see incidents of verbal arguments, physical and or sexual abuse. Hearing. They hear arguments, threats, or fighting noises from another room. Children observe the outcome of physical abuse, such as blood, bruises, tears, torn clothing, broken items, etc. Aware, some families believe that any kind of argument that happen in the family does not impact or affect the children because they're babies, they're children. But the truth is, the children are aware of the tension in the home, such as their mother's fearfulness when the abuser walks into the house. A secure, ongoing relationship with a caregiver is fundamental for the successful physical, emotional, and social development of a child. When children are exposed directly or indirectly to domestic violence, the studies show the impact on the children as follows. Physical impact: delay in development, frequent illness, that is poorer general health, higher irritability, and increased scream and crying we see in babies, disruption in eating and sleeping routines, hurting physically self or others. Psychological impacts: withdrawn or poor concentration. Children, after witnessing the violence, the children would be hypervigilant of their surroundings, and they would be constantly in fight, flight, or freeze mode. They are on high alert in order to protect themselves. They maintain an intense and sometimes obsessive awareness of their surroundings, frequently scanning for threats or routes of escape. Inappropriate sexual behavior, fearful reactions to loud noise. We also see depression, anxiety, and tension. Trauma due to witnessing a threat to a caregiver is also related to more severe symptoms and increased arousal and fear. And when it comes to social impacts, we see low self-esteem in children, youth, anger and aggression. It's common we hear children's behavior such as pushing, hitting peers, struggles with self-regulation, cruel to animals, etc. Disrespect to particular gender, bullying, and there are many more. Moving to the various systems involved in domestic violence cases: the police service, child protection service or child welfare, children's aid society, the hospital service, the school system, the shelter homes, legal service, court. The police service: once an individual report a domestic incident to the police attend the home and interview the adults and the children. You can ask for interpretation services if you are a non-English speaker. Charges will be laid on the abuser with the statements and evidence you provide. If you have photos, text messages, emails, or other evidence of the abuse, threats that was made, you have experienced, you can share those information with the officers. You may also have an option to make a video statement and submit the evidence, and these reports are used in court as well. The police either take the abuser to the station or release him or her with conditions pertinent to the victim. The child, all children or youth would stay with a victim or a safe person, or they're removed from an unsafe place to an extended family's home or a shelter or a hospital if anyone is injured from the incident. For most of the immigrant families, they may not have extended families in Canada, which is a complicating factor. The police make a referral to the Children's Aid Society in that jurisdiction when children are involved in domestic incidents. Referrals are also made to victim services with your consent. Victim services works to prevent victimization by offering a variety of violence prevention programs. The police also follow up with the family and update them about the charges on the abuser and also advise the victim's legal conditions. Next system: child protection service, child welfare system, Children's Aid Society. Under the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act, every person who has responsible grounds to suspect that a child is or may need protection must promptly report the suspicion and the information to Children's Aid Society. When does Children's Aid Society involve? If the parents or caregivers verbally argue and yell at each other frequently, emotionally abusive or physically violent to each other, or if the parents or caregivers do things that could harm their children, for example, if there's similar concerns that then a family member or a child or youth or a neighbor or a stranger walking by your home hearing the yelling can call the Children's Aid Society to report. Or if a parent or caregiver does not stop their partner or other adults, including other family members, from doing things that could harm the children, this is also considered as neglect to protect the child. So what happens after a report is received by the Children's Aid Society? The report will be investigated The situation will be evaluated to ensure the child and family receives the support necessary to keep the child safe. During the investigation, the parents and the children are interviewed separately, but many services you can request an interpreter if you're a non-English speaker. Safety planning. Since you already touched base on safety planning, I'm not going to go in detail. So safety planning is to ensure the family's safety. In safety planning, the family is involved in decision making and safety planning, so the victim, children, and safe people know the steps to follow, who to contact, things to do safely when they are in a similar or unsafe situation. A referral is made to the shelter homes, which can be part of the safety planning. Also connect to resources, for example, legal support for child custody, access arrangement, and for legal separation. Also, they connect to ongoing counseling services and immigration services, especially for newcomers. Right to seek legal support. The family has the right to seek legal support if parents disagree or do not want the CAS involvement. In situation where there is no parent or caregiver or an extended family or friend who you trust to care for the child, this would be the main concern for an immigrant family. The child will be removed from the home and placed in a foster home until there's a safe parent, extended family member who could care for the child. CAs can be a support for the family during a difficult time. They can support you to navigate, to connect to resources and supports in the community. Moving to healthcare systems and school system. The person that experiencing any kind of intimate partner violence can talk to the family doctor, or in Ontario, you can contact assault violence care. One resource is the sexual assault or domestic violence care department at Women's College Hospital. So once you call the sexual assault or violence care, they do the assessment and documentation of injuries and assault history. They do testing for drugs that may have been used to commit the assault, do risk assessment and safety planning, discuss your emotional and physical well-being following the assault. Also, they connect to mental health services if needed. There are social workers at the hospital and school settings, and they connect you to resources in the community and to ongoing counseling services. Also, make referral to community resources, again, for individual or couple counseling services. Health professionals and school system also have the duty to report to the Children's Aid Society if they are worried about any child or youth safety. Moving to shelter homes, the shelter system. When a family arrives in a shelter home, a caseworker is assigned to them. They advocate for the family. They support with housing, legal, ongoing counseling, Ontario work, school registration for newcomers, etc., and safety planning. Safety planning is very important. As the situation changes, the safety planning is also reviewed. Moving to legal system, you may need legal advice to go to court to apply for child custody, emergency protection or restraining order, legal separation, etc. Legal Aid Ontario is a legal aid program for individuals who cannot afford to hire a lawyer. So if you're eligible, if you receive Ontario Works or Ontario Disability Support Program payments, if you have no income, you're new to Canada, living in a shelter, so you would be eligible for a legal aid program. Victim or Witness Assistance Program, VWAP. This program provides services to victims or witnesses of domestic violence. After charges have been laid, the police or Crown Attorney refers victims and witnesses to the program for help. You can also call to access the program on your own, or have someone in the community call on behalf of you. And VWAP will contact you to offer support and to respond to any safety concerns. VWAP will talk to you and provide assistance based on the specific case and needs and support until the court case is over. The service is free of cost. The program explains to you about the criminal justice system, courtroom procedures, and your role in court, help you understand what to expect at each court date, and help you prepare for your appearance in court. Contact the Crown Attorney or the police officer in charge of your case on your behalf. They also offer ongoing emotional support throughout the court process. They also refer to community agencies for other services you may need, such as counseling and safety planning, arrange for language interpreters, or accommodate any special needs. The longer someone stays in an abusive relationship, the more intense the violence will become. If you believe yourself or your child or children are not safe and you want to get support to bring positive changes in your life, you can connect with one of the systems to support you and your family. I hope through this session, through this presentation, you have gained greater awareness about the systems involved in domestic violence, situation that plays up in a relationship, and I hope you're walking away with great awareness. Thank you. Back to you, Shine.
Thank you, Jisha. As we know, millions of children around the world live in homes in which domestic violence has happened at least once. And these children are greater risk of repeating the cycle as adults and entering into abusive relationship or becoming abusers themselves. Thank you, Jisha, for stressing out the different systems that offer a variety of services in our communities, as early intervention is one of the best ways to counter-react the effects of witnessing abuse. Also, just a reminder to all the audience that since we are almost coming towards the end of the sessions and we have the Q&A coming up very shortly, if you guys have any questions you want our presenters to answer, kindly post that using the chat option through Zoom. Given the staggering individual, interpersonal, and societal cost of intimate partner violence, it is critical to examine how this problem is being addressed in terms of intervention programs that target the abusive individuals who are responsible for these negative outcomes. As we all know, many times men are the perpetrators of violence, and today, Lazar Kakasheri will be talking to us about some of the practical ways of how men can engage in services to end the cycle of violence. Lazar is a registered social worker, and he holds a master's in social work with specialization in medical and psychiatry, and has MPhil degree in advanced social work research and practice. Lazar has several years of experience in India working as a clinical social worker, consultant, and trainer for social workers. He has also worked as intervention and project manager for Bhumiga Trust. Lazar has worked as a program manager in Good Shepherd nonprofit homes for 7 years, and has also worked as a counselor in the PAR program, the Partner Assault program, and at the Catholic Family Services in Brampton. Lazar is currently working as a mental health worker in Halton region, providing mental health support to the recipients of social assistance in Ontario West. Over to you, Lazar.
Thank you, Shine. And I would like to thank all the MASWO members for giving me this opportunity in a special way. I would like to thank all the MASWO members who reached out to me when I was down with COVID. Thank you all. And let me be really quick. We are sort of running short of time. And this is a picture all of you would be able to relate to the day you landed in Canada with all the hopes and ambitions of having a new life, a new settlement. So you would have noticed you bring a lot of clothes with you, a lot of things that you need in Canada. But what also comes with you is all your attitude, all your socialization process, all that you learned in India, all your experiences. So we come to Canada with all of that. And they stay in the luggage and till a time comes out. So the process of re-establishing in a new country, you need to learn the rules of the land. You need to learn, get your driver's license, getting a house for rent. We go through a lot of pressure in this period when you're new to Canada, learning to pronounce the names of the places, Bramalia or Bramley, which is the right way. It'll take a while for us to understand and say the right things. So it is in this process that we go through a lot of stress within the family, a lot of areas of conflicts, a lot of potential areas of conflict. So think of a situation. Imagine the situation. The husband has to work 2 jobs to pay the bills. So he's coming home. He's really exhausted and tired. On the way home, he grabs a few drinks. So he comes home. As soon as he opens the door, he finds his house is in a mess. He wants everything to be neat and tidy. But as soon as he enters the house, he's got a little child. That child is running around. He's made a mess. And then he starts blaming his wife because his wife is supposed to take care of the family. And then he settles down to watch TV. Unfortunately, the internet is slow, so he can't watch a movie. And the baby is crying, and the mother, and he always wants warm food when he comes home. So the wife is busy in the kitchen preparing warm meal for the husband. The baby is crying. He's upset. And that's a potential scenario for so many unpleasant things to happen. And as we have all been hearing that men are the abuser, women are the victims, but both of them need support and care. So how do we support them? Can we move on to the next slide, please? So this equality for men and women, this is not something new. This was promulgated way back in 1981, that United Nations declared that men and women need equal rights in everything. But in a recent study, as recent as 2018, 40% of Indian women said every man has a right to beat me. So we come from a land where it is accepted. Yeah, my husband beats me, so what? In East Timor, it's up to 80% of women said, yeah, my husband has every right to beat me. But we come to a country where there is zero violence against women. We are moving more towards zero tolerance, not zero violence, zero tolerance towards any form of violence against women. And there is mandatory charging for police. So in this scenario, how do we help men who are the perpetrators of violence against women? So we'd like to move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So I want to ask men, as a man, I can relate to this. I'm going to ask you in all these 8 dimensions, how are you? Are you happy? Let's start off with your emotional health. Are you able to accept your emotions? Do you feel uneasy when your wife is doing well, better than you? She's got a job, she's got more money. Are you able to sit well with that? Or something bothering you? How is your spiritual health? What is your value system? How do you see women? What is your value system to see a woman? How is your intellectual area? We want all children, as most of the immigrants do, we sign up children for various activities. They go to Kumon, they learn language, we sort of pack their entire day. How about you, sir? Do you keep yourself occupied? Do you take part in advancing your knowledge and skills? How is your physical health? Do you eat well? Do you take care of your own physical health? How is your environmental health? When I mean environmental health is, how is your home? We all want our homes to be neat and tidy, but what is your role in making sure the house is neat and tidy? Do you wash dishes? Do you clean the house? Or is it just the women's responsibility to take care of the house, to make sure it is all clean and tidy? I put in rules and my wife has to make sure the house is kept neat and tidy. So what is my role in taking care of the environment of my house to keep it tidy? Am I willing to share responsibilities with my wife? Who has to take the garbage out? Who has to wash the wall, clean the toilet? Is it just my wife has to do, or do I take on equal responsibilities in that? Do I sit comfortably in that? How about my financial health? Am I able to live within my means? Am I able to spend where it is needed? Or am I struggling financially? Or is my wife earning more than me? Or am I comfortable with that? If my wife is earning more, do I give her the freedom to make decisions, financial decisions especially? She's got a better job, she got the mortgage, she wants to buy a house. What is my say in that? Do I give her that freedom, or do I try to keep her under my thumb? How is my occupational health? Am I able to find a job of my choice? As we all know, getting a social worker's job is really difficult in Canada. Am I able to do that? So what am I doing in terms of my occupational health? For now, I have to work in a factory. Am I happy with that? Am I satisfied with my occupational health? Do I need support in that domain? What about my social life? Am I able to enter into a relationship, grow in that relationship? We learn a lot of modeling behavior. Am I a role model for my child? I saw my dad beating up my mother, and my grandfather beating up my grandmother, my uncles beating up. So I come from a society where that was totally accepted. But here in Canada, am I doing the same behavior? How are my children learning from me? What are they seeing in me? So when we ask ourselves this question in all these dimensions, how am I? Is all these 8 dimensions of my health, is it good? Does it need support? What do I do if I identify that, yes, I don't feel comfortable with my wife working, she's earning more, I haven't even got a job of my own, and I find ways to sort of keep her under my control. So the problem is not with my wife, the problem is with me. So once I identify that I need support in certain areas of my emotional health, I don't know how to control my anger, I don't know how to, I have anger outbursts. So that means my emotional health needs to be taken care of. I cannot see my wife as an equal partner. My spiritual health needs support. So once we identify our need for support in these areas, what do? Can we move on to the next slide, please? What do I do once I identify that we need support? Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. Nobody is perfect. We are not machines programmed to function. Like, okay, once we are programmed, no, we're not human beings with flesh, heart, and soul. We have all our weaknesses. We have all our strength. But how do we lead a reasonably balanced life, able to balance in all these 8 dimensions? Once I identify, yes, I need support. Beating up my wife is not a solution. If I need financially, if I need support, I need help in that area. So where do I go for help? So one of the man rule is man does not ask for help. However difficult the situation is, they don't ask for help. Here is an opportunity. So once you identify, yes, I'm struggling with my social situation. I'm struggling with my wife's success. I'm struggling to share responsibilities with my wife. So what do I do once I identify that I need support? There are a lot of professionals we can reach out to. The easiest person to reach out is your family doctor. Talk to him. If you're really stressed out, am I drinking to sort of suppress my emotions? It's very hard for me to deal with certain emotions. I would rather drown myself in alcohol or other substances because it's so difficult for me to deal with it. Reach out for help. Ask your family doctor. Ask your employment assistance program. Reach out to them. Every company offers free EAP program. If you have difficulty in social relationship, you have difficulty with children, they grow up in a very social situation. As Ceci was mentioning, in India, if a boy is dating girl, they think something's wrong with the boy in India. Or if the girl wants to date a boy in India, they may take them to a counselor saying that my son wants to date a girl or my girl wants to date a boy. Whereas in India, if the girl is not dating a boy, if a boy is not dating a girl, they'll bring the child to you saying that something is not wrong or not okay with my child. They don't want to get along with people of opposite sex. So there is cultural differences. If my son wants to be a gay, or if things are like that, and if they want to choose a same-sex partner, does it sit well with me? If I'm struggling with that, I have to reach out for support. CMHA offers free walk-in counseling, and you have to, as a man, when you're struggling, once you know you're struggling, White Ribbon is the biggest campaign that they do to sort of bring about a change. To sort of end, she needs support and care as well, and men as well. So White Ribbon has a beautiful program of, they offer a pledge program. Now that so many men have attended this program, that means you want to bring about a change. As a man, how do I get involved in this process? It's so easy to sort of, why do we have to get involved? Men, they are the cause of all the problem. No, we have to engage them, and they can start at an individual level before they start joining an organization. So I would like to invite every man to take this pledge. This pledge is, how are you going to respect and treat women in your life? Log on to this website and take the pledge. Do this with your wife. Let your son see you're taking a pledge. Let your daughter see that you're taking a pledge to be respectful to your one and your life partner and other women you see in your life. And I have taken my pledge. Now it is your turn to take the pledge and make a difference. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Shine.
Thank you, Lasser. Thanks for highlighting all the wonderful information that you have. Especially thanks for highlighting about how through education, awareness, raising capacity building, and seeking help, men can also embrace the incredible potential that they have to be part of this positive change. And now we have come to the end of the presentation. So we will now move to the question and answer session. So we have probably we have already run out of time. So, but let's see how many questions we would be able to tackle in maybe probably like 10 to 15 minutes for the questions, and then sharing the thoughts if somebody wants to share their thoughts. So our different presenters, based on their experience and expertise, will share their thoughts and give answers to the questions raised. So I do see there is one question that has come up in the chat actually. So it said, why the session is focused on South Asian community only? So I think Sissy, it would be good question, maybe if you would like to answer, and obviously if any of the other presenters would like to jump in, do so.
For sure, I think that's a great question. I think it was very intentional that we as the MASWO group, being South Asians, I think MASWO regularly conducts these webinars on different subjects. And so being South Asians ourselves, we thought that it is very important, given that we are, this month is devoted to addressing violence against women. So we thought that it was very timely to bring this topic out to our community and to talk about it. And as you can see, we were very inclusive. We brought our very chief speaker, Liz, to actually also contribute, So yes, it was catered to our South Asian community for these very reasons. So please feel free to add on if anything needs to be added on, please, speakers, but that's what I can think of.
Okay. I think one question that I was thinking about is, and Liz, maybe with your experience working in the field for long, what would be some of your suggestions to reach out to help a couple who experiences some kinds of tensions in their relationship at home? Because many times we know that people, especially the victims, have a tendency of shutting their mouth, not talking about what's going on, feeling that they might not be trusted. So what are some of the suggestions or tips that you can offer for the people or the couple who recognizes that, yeah, we do recognize there's some tension going on in our family. What can we do?
Sure. Oh, I don't know if I unmuted myself. I think I did. I think it's very difficult to do as a couple. So it's a bit trickier in that respect. So one of the things many women share with us is it's very hard when they're approached in a couple scenario. So if you are noticing that there is behavior that is concerning for you, as you're observing a couple in your friendship circle, to be able to have that one-on-one time with the woman would be very helpful. So by that, I mean as simple as a phone call, a contact with her, a text message, being able to meet in the bathroom, which is where much unfolds when we're back post-COVID times, to be able to say, you know what, that felt pretty crappy what I just saw. How was that for you? It felt painful when I saw it. What was it like for you? So you can open up that piece from a gentle place. What women have said over and over again to each of our colleagues is, I don't feel like a victim of violence. I don't feel like a survivor of violence. I feel like a woman who loves a person who is treating me badly. So to meet a person from that place, recognizing the safety is very helpful in a private situation. Also, when stuff is happening with a couple and you're present, and this pre-COVID times happens to me a lot when I'm in situations, social situations, and statements are made that are very demeaning and quite controlling, I'll often raise my eyebrows and go, ouch, and move the conversation along, noting and naming that piece. I have a number of kind men in my life who will also say, no, we're not going in this direction, and we'll change the conversation for exactly that purpose. But by naming it first, we're not going there, usually with some humor intact, the message is clear that that's not going to be okay. And then the follow-up is individually, and the same individually with the person who's causing harm. Following up from a place of that behavior was concerning to me. How are you? And then when the person says, you know what, I'm really stressed. I came home today and the house wasn't clean. I'm annoyed with my wife. Yeah. So when we're annoyed and stressed, I'm sure she's annoyed and stressed too, right? So in her annoyance and stress, does she hit you? No. In your annoyance and stress, what are other ways that that can be discharged from your body that doesn't involve hitting? In all of those ways, it's still holding the dignity of each person involved, the belief that change is possible, but there has to be an accountability to the behavior. And usually humor and short sentences and privacy allows the dignity of each person to be held and it not to feel as an attack, rather a calling into our better selves. Yeah, that's what I'd say. I'd be happy to have other folks to add.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. That was really wonderful because many times this is the impression that we have, right? Couples experience kind of tension. So how do we deal it together? And sometimes it's not easy to deal it together and you need to separate and things separate. And thanks for bringing that up. Again, if any of you have any questions or any suggestions, you are welcome to ask. But moving on, so since we all know that we live in a multicultural society, right, especially Toronto and Ontario as such, right? So Jisha, from your experience and knowledge, is it possible to request for a children's aid worker from the same culture or someone who speaks of the same language so that the family feels that they are comfortable enough to talk and they don't have to worry about what they are talking, or in the sense like, okay, would I make a mistake when I talk in English? Am I able to talk, communicate effectively? So from your experience, what do you think, Jisha? And again, the other presenters, from your own experiences, if you would like to share an example of something that you guys have come across, that would be great.
Thanks, Shine. As a client, you have every right to request, but it depends if there are adequate resources. In GTA, there is multicultural society than in rural areas, so CAs may have your request met and possible to get a worker who has the same cultural background. And again, for language barriers, you can ask the request for interpretation services.
Awesome. Does anyone want to add? Sissy or Lazar or Liz, any of your experiences that you guys have dealt with? In general, I'm not, so let's not just focus on the children's aid, getting service from them, but in general.
I'd like to loop back for a second to what I have previously said, to contextualize that, to know the reason why I talked about separate links a little bit to what you've talked about who is present with you when you tell your truth. Sometimes it's really helpful to have someone present with you when you tell your truth who is from your culture. Sometimes it's really terrifying because they are part of the community you are part of. And you may have concerns and fears that they may hold some blame and shame for what you have done or not done in the context of what's happened to you. The other reason for the separate before together, and I always call it separate before together, because I'm not saying nothing can be done together, but long before that moment happens, there has to be safety. And this is a key component we've talked about a little bit today. There isn't safety in a room where there has been an experience of harm with both the person who caused the harm and the person who is suffering from the harm, because the power imbalance is real and cannot be mitigated without consequence for her after we leave, after we have left that room and she is left to account for, justify, and often be punished for what she has said or not said in her body language or her words. So it's a really unsafe place that I think we often enter into regularly. When we have interpreters come to our site, another piece that can unfold, unless we have an interpreter trained in violence against women, of which there is a training program across the province to certify interpreters, they will add their own interpretations of whatever is being said, as opposed to translating completely back and forth what the counselor is saying and what the woman is saying or the man is saying. This is very difficult because what women will tell us afterwards, this has also been advice given in the context of that can include many things, like in examples of religious faith, go talk to the person who is of your faith and they'll be able to sort it out for you. Maybe don't tell these people because it might be better to keep it within the family and tell these people. These messages can convey in 1 to 2 sentences. So to have a person who has already been trained in how to do that navigation between a counselor and a person who's experienced harm is so important and so critical. And it also helps debunk many of the myths we all hold about violence, because it's really hard to think we can do this to one another. So I think we often believe that it's a cause of alcohol, it's a cause of mental health, it's a cause of stress. It's much harder to hold that this incredible capacity for harm is within us and reinforced by many, many, many systemics, levels of beliefs and attitudes. And that's very difficult. And the other piece that I was itching to say all the way through as well is the systems of policing in Canada, well, maybe being viewed as positive, and this is recorded. I better really watch myself and where this recording goes. So I'm going to be as diplomatic as possible, but I really need to say this. Less than 15% of women who experience harm go to the police. There are multiple reasons for this, and it needs to be her choice. And that system has continuously evidenced itself to hold many systemic prejudices, and racialized people do not generally receive justice in that system. Women do not generally receive justice in that system. And that's a very painful reality of how the systems of oppression show up in our systems and how we need to pull that apart to make criminal justice really about justice and about restoration and about how people go forward from a place of healing and accountability. And many people who are racialized have shared very directly with myself and members of our agency who are non-racialized that the system is a very painful place to be. So I just wanted to say for folks on the call, absolutely the police system is there for you, and it needs to be undertaken with your own decision to want to be involved in that system, recognizing the racism that is existent in every one of our systems. And now
Thank you, Liz and Jisha, for sharing your experience and thoughts about what has been asked. So since I don't see a lot of questions coming up, so once again, thank you.
Lassa has raised his hand for making some comments.
Okay,
I just want to add, just because you're not able to find someone of your culture or language who can understand you shouldn't stop you from making a complaint. If you feel that you need support, please reach out for support, and some form support will reach you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lassa. That's very true.
Shine,
So once again,
Shine, if I can just add in one last comment.
sure.
And I like to just speak from the client's perspective, because having worked for these many years and so closely with my clients, I would just like to keep their voice as the last voice, that there's such great comfort. And again, there's both in the spectrum that clients majority of the times in our culture find such great comfort when there is a worker that comes into their homes or into their lives that speaks the language, understands their culture, and they become so much more open to showing their vulnerabilities and all that they're living through. So they almost give us systems this privilege and this blessed position to actually consider ourselves as family members, so that's I call it a very divine connection that happens between a client and a counselor or a CS worker. And also when CS or the police shows up with a cultural sensitive or language specific worker, there are less people showing in versus there's an interpreter and a translator and and different workers. So I think there's so much merit when the cultural match is made. And then the client's sense of agency, their sense of, they have the rights to ask. If they don't want a cultural specific, we give it all to them, so they make that last decision, as Liz was saying, that what seems right and best for them. We always give them that sense of agency and choice and decision to make, Yeah.
Thank you, Sissy.
No problem. Most welcome.
All right. So as we are winding up. So once again, thank you for all the suggestions and informations that were really helpful, and huge round of applause to MASWO executive team, and special mention to the expert panel of presenters, Liz Brown, Sissy Daniel, Jisha Johnson, and Lazar Kakashiri. Before I end, just wanted to quote one of the famous quote of Napoleon: "The world suffers not because of violence or of bad people, but because of the silence of good people." So as social workers, as professionals, and as allies, let us all stand up for the individual who have been abused and offer support and help the victims. Special thanks to all the audience, and I wish all of you a wonderful day. Thank you.